Concerning Violence, which is narrated by Lauryn Hill. Which is narrated by Lauryn Hill. Basically, it's based off the book of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, and without wasting any more time, we are just going to delve right into it. And please stay back also for the engagement session after. So thank you. Thank you very much. This brings to the end of our film, but also the beginning of an engaging and enticing conversation amongst ourselves. So at this point, we just start opening the floor for us to share our thoughts, share our feelings, emotions, whatnot, but just in a spirit of sharing.
She's clearing her throat, so I'm saying
yes, we have somebody in the back. So can you please speak out loud?
So I think more people, especially people my age, I think this should be like, I think this should be like a compulsory something that everybody should get to learn, because I feel like most of us, we don't even know what our ancestors went through. We don't even know what Africa has had to go through. And in January, I had gone for a UN conference for tertiary students, and they would ask us to make deliberations and come up with resolutions. And every time I would come up with something that meant coming back to us, accepting Africa, like going back for self and being for self, everybody would say whatever I'm saying is so primitive, and that I'm primitive. And when are we going to get there? Wow. When are we going to get to where Europe is? And wow. It's sad that these people that we call intelligent, my age, they keep going back to, let's go back to the white people. Let's go for money from the white people. And I just have one simple thing that I say is, if my hand is in your mouth, you can't bite me. If my hand is in your mouth and you say jump, I'll jump. Sit, I'll sit. We need to take our hands out of these people's mouths. Otherwise, we'll never move on. But it was very emotional, and I was very sad. And I'm very sad, that's all I can say. And I'm very shaken. And I don't know if there's a way, somehow we can get us, people like me, to watch these things and partake in stuff, because I feel like we really lost touch with our roots. That's all I think. And it's very, very sad for me. I feel it's very, very sad and very emotional. Thank you.
At the very least, what we try to do is every Thursday, we show these films. Writing is very good. So you could, garner the support of a few friends, and also, every Thursday at from 5 to about 7:30, this will do.
And there's an email list that she can get on, right? That will announce it? Yeah. So if you could maybe resend that, if you can give your information to them to get on the email list, and then Doc, you guys can resend it. Because I was looking for it so I could get tonight's name of the film to post on a bunch of platforms, but I didn't see it, but I did post it last week and the week before.
Well, I think there's no two ways about that. It's quite emotional and sensational, and as an African, it's just quite interesting to know what fathers went through, and some of them I've read about them, but it's quite a different thing seeing some graphic images of them or get you to know how they went through. So that's just an eye-opening. Even though some of the assertions that the narrator gave are a bit more debatable, but I think that what is also quite crucial is, so my wife is from Netherlands, not only to also see what ancestors did to us. But I guess that it starts some sort of discussion and negotiations, and it's not just well, we have to think for ourselves. We don't have to ape the West, but it's not as simple as that. And I guess that's how our governments always struggle. They wouldn't want to go to IMF, but then they still don't have any ways of really doing things on their own. And so I guess the discussions and the deliberations ought to go on. And I think I'm more impressed that she's here to, of course, she already knows what happened during colonial times, but also quite interesting for her to see the perspective from the movie, and then see how she can also do, or what she can also do to give back to Africa, I suppose.
So I have a question concerning violence, or about violence. I think it's something that we struggle with a lot, in the sense that in the book or in the movie now that we've seen, it's almost like Fanon was alluding to the fact that the only real option is violence, or to fight back with violence. And towards the end, it sort of ended with, we need to return to self, we need to look, we need to leave Europe alone, and like basically look at ourselves and try grow and progress ourselves. So is using violence not just a reaction, or is it not just us entertaining or allowing what has been brought towards us to sort of control how we react to it by using violence? So is using violence not just us being part of this hamster wheel and continuing to just, so that's my question. Is violence really the answer when it comes to us trying to return to ourselves and understand ourselves better? That's my question.
To answer her,
Yeah.
From my understanding of the video, I don't think the last part was alluding to the idea of going to violence, resorting to violence. The Wretched of the Earth, yes, speaks about violence in the sense that when there are two conflicting forces, both trying to dominate, there would be tension. And in this case, the tension is the violence. And so the preface to the documentary was that, yes, decolonization brought about violence because it was a necessity. And then they showed us various stages, various countries that fought for their decolonization, and we saw the violence that prevailed there. But I think at the latter part of the video, where the narrator was trying to tell us to revive ourselves, and judging from the way she said it, I don't think she's telling us to resort to violence, even though that was the way we were decolonized the first time. This second time, maybe we can find another alternative, but I don't think the person was talking about violence in the sense of the first decolonization. Yeah.
I agree with what you're saying, and I would add to that, I didn't get an understanding that it was violence as a one-size-fits-all approach to anything and everything. One of the things I like how Malcolm X represented, he said, is you respect me, I'll respect you. You slap me, I'm gonna slap you, right? So as we say on the streets, don't bring none, won't be none. So I think violence in that regard, that we're not gonna no longer stand by and smile and sing kumbaya while you aggress against us violently. That's not gonna happen. You bring violence, you're gonna get violence. Other than that, let's look among ourselves for our own answers, because that's where the answers are. And you saw the example among the soldiers. I don't remember the country right now, where the men and women, they became soldiers, women were Mozambique. Okay, I was gonna say Mozambique, but I wasn't sure. And they found a way to make it. They found a way to be okay, because they put their minds and their efforts and their energies together for that, to make that happen. I thought what was interesting was how they continued to contrast how the Obrunis were living, and then how the Africans were forging out a meaning for themselves. And I thought that in and of itself was violent. That this vulgarity of, we're going to be posh at the expense of your humanity, and at the expense of your suffering and at the expense of the limitation of your humanity, we want to have poshness, you know. And I do think, as a social scientist, the reality is that there are some things that, as was narrated, because she's just a narrator, doesn't mean that she invented it, right? There are some things that can only be responded to by violence. It's just the way it is. It's just human nature and functioning. There are a lot of things that we can negotiate. You can talk people down from some stuff, and you can figure out better ways to get around it. But there are some things that, as was said in the film, it will only respond to a greater violence. It's just the way it is.
If I'm to add to that, so I think that, you know, the violence becomes, there are like stages in the decolonization or the re-Africanization process. Violence becomes a necessity at some stage. And it's what I greatly admire Sankara for, as well as Amilcar Cabral, you know. So even though they were like in military gear and all of that, when they were not fighting, they were planting, you know, they were doing like social projects, you know, trying to uplift like the people. Of course, we are not always going to be fighting, but, you know, in those times that we are not fighting, you know, as with the Amilcar Cabral and his like resistance movement, you know, they were teaching the people agricultural methods, you know, and whatnot. But in various parts too, you see that violence becomes a necessity because, you know, the Europeans were not willing to let go of their so-called colonial territory. So it became like, you know, what do you call it, the only force, the only thing that they will listen to. As Frantz Fanon starts in the beginning of the text, decolonization is always a violent phenomenon because, you know, because the act of colonization itself is a violent phenomena. So to, you know, wrestle yourself back, it's going to be violent. But I don't think that it's meant to be a violent thing throughout, you know. I mean, at some point, yes, like as we can feel in Ghana right now, I mean, we can see it in the form of stages, you know. The violent phase may have been done, but what do we do now? Are we still going to now go sing and beg to Europe? Are we trying to be Europeans? And that's why I love how it ended, that if Europe is what we aspire to, you know, that we might as well just let them come back and then handle. I mean, we are seeing that in new forms and whatnot. But the thing is that, interestingly, the imperialists and then the colonialists also understand that violence is the only solution. So what do they keep doing? They keep arming themselves. They come here to train jungle warfare. I mean, what kind of jungles do you have out in the US that you would want to be learning jungle warfare from us? You know, they want to set up their military bases and whatnot. So I think that they really do understand that maybe at some point you know, at this point that we are in, we may have to resort to violence again, because from how things are going, I mean, and honestly, that would be a reactionary, you know, method. But at some point to, you know, once we've won that struggle, we can now go back and then return to self. But I think that the act of decolonization must be holistic. So we cannot just take violence and then, you know, we must be looking at the role of violence, we must be looking at the role of education, you know, self-education, farming, all of these. We must be considering all the options on the table, but violence may not necessarily be the only way, but at some point it may be a needed reaction towards, you know, a pre-action or an action towards us. But I would also love to know what you think. Yeah.
I sometimes think that, well, it's not only the physical form of violence. I think there's the other elements and dimensions of violence. And what we face now is not really the physical one that we'll see. And so the struggle and our response to it is not always going to be that physical violence. But obviously we need to move beyond their aggression, their ways of, or their new whims and ways of colonizing us in other ways. So, of course, the intellectual violence or psychological violence. So the warfare is still there, and we need to have better and newer approaches to really overcoming those aggressions. One of the things that, I mean, your question really struck me was this whole vigilantism that we are faced with now, and I was wondering whether wouldn't the best response to that be violence, right? So whether the military moving in to stop all the activities, rather than saying political parties ought to go and negotiate and sit down and think about how they can stop vigilantism. When we have the security agencies, we have the military, you know, why don't they just move in and stop all these activities? Maybe a good response to vigilantism would be violence rather than negotiation or discussion or deliberation, or leaving it to the politicians to think about how they would be able to resolve that, because I think it's more of a security issue. How do you solve a security issue with a political solution? I mean, it needs a security, solution, like having the military moving. But anyway, that's just my view.
I've got a question. So do you feel like the vigilante, the whole thing around vigilante is like an act of colonization?
No, I'm not saying it's an act of colonization,
Okay.
but I'm saying that these guys, when we have all those vigilante is supposed to be vigilance, not necessarily to take the law into your own hands and then cause violence and mayhem and all that. So whilst they do that, and then we're thinking about solutions to that. So I'm not looking at it as colonization, but I'm just looking at the way they use violence in harassing, in violence in trying to cover people into not voting and all that. And I'm thinking, well, a better response to their violent behavior is to aggressively tackle the issue, rather than saying politicians should go and meet and discuss and see ways in which they can stop it. I don't think that's ever going to work, especially when they don't have the willpower to really stop that. I mean, what is the military doing? Do you think if the military, 3-4 military men are at the police station, these guys will have the nerve to come and cause violence? No. So it's not that they are colonizing, as I'm just saying that because they are using violence in threatening our democracy, probably the solution to that will be having a stronger, aggressive way, like the military moving in.
There's a tree proverb that that is a fight between clans people or nation people. When we fight, we just bite off the hairs, but we do not uproot the hair. So I do not think that I agree with you in a sense of like the issue of vigilante, we've got to respond to it with violence. If anything is what I feel like the military is also another form of legal vigilante system. But I think that with the vigilante is like something that is, I don't know, I feel like it's maybe if we are to use violence, to use the words of Kufuor, to be like killing a fly with a sledgehammer, and it's just, I feel like the issue of vigilante compared to the reaction that we would give to the nature of colonization are like two-way different things, and I don't think that in this space, I can look at vigilante in the same way as I'll look at, like decolonization and then re-Africanization. And that is just my personal opinion.
I'm not saying we should look at it from that angle.
Okay.
I'm just saying the principle that where there is violence, sometimes the only solution to that is violence, right? And I'm saying that in the context that we have, where the vigilante groups are using violence to threaten our democracy, probably one of the ways in which we can respond to that is not political negotiation or asking political parties to go and deliberate. They are the ones creating the vigilante groups. So really, the best result is not for them to just dialogue about it. But So it's not the context of decolonization, but it is something like, just think maybe politicians need to consider that particular habit. But my own view has always been that, come on, the only solution to it is just to legalize it. Register them, legalize it, and see whether they will be able to. I mean, once they are illegal entities, they have to operate within the legal framework, right? And it will be easier for us to identify them when they cause some violence or do some violent act. But nobody knows who they are. So it's difficult to really, difficult to really say they should disband it, especially when it's just a voluntary societies or associations that people form and join. Anyway, so but that's a different context.
Yeah,
but it's still, I guess, the solutions can still be plausibly applied to that. Maybe not in the context of colonization or decolonization.
Oh yes. Okay, that would be a lot easier. So, like in my view, in the documentary, it's really focused on decolonization. It's focused on these whites who have come into Africa, raped, killed, plundered, so forth and so on. I think to equate the vigilante system or situation in Ghana to what was going on in this documentary is to kind of, I don't know what the word is, pull us off of what the actual topic and what the actual focus is.
But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just saying, so I guess you're getting me wrong. Because
So-
she's just asking
so you are talking now, I'm talking.
as to whether violence is, but I guess you are misrepresenting what I'm saying. I'm not saying
No,
that
I'm
we
saying
can't
that you've
equate
been
the two.
speaking. Now I'd like to get us back on track. I think you've taken us away from the track, and now I'd like for us to focus.
Right, but the point is that I'm not
So
saying
can I
that
speak
I'm,
now?
I'm not equating the two.
Can I speak now?
But you are misrepresenting what I'm saying.
Can
That
I
is
speak?
why I interjected.
Can I speak now?
Sure.
Okay. So I think we've gone off on a tangent to deal with vigilantism in Ghana. I'd like for us to focus on what the video, what the film, what the documentary was actually speaking about. I think that if we focus on this, we're looking at what these whites, specifically we dealt with the Portuguese, so forth and so on, did. They came into Africa, they raped, pillaged, and plundered. And concerning violence, Frantz Fanon is dealing with how to deal with that, right? We were talking earlier about reciprocity, right? So reciprocity, this is any Derulento, the one who throws the ashes come back to that person, right? What you do comes back to you in some shape or form. Now you can wait for the universe and cosmos to do it for you, or realize that you're not separate from that universe and cosmos and be a part of that rebalancing, that restoration of Ma'at. If you look at, and oftentimes we get this idea that if we're violent, then we'll become just like them, as though we are just naturally, fawns and doves and something else. Now the talk that I gave this morning actually gave you the earliest known war of black liberation, which was the expulsion of the Hyksos from Kemet. If you look at a text like the Prophecy of Nefertiti, then it talks about how Amini will take these Eurasians out, these white people out, with the flame, with the sword, and then that's when Ma'at will return to her seat, whereas Isfet is driven away. So we have a rich tradition dating back thousands of years of African people using violence. Now, because we don't know that history, then we think that this is like a modern day thing, so forth and so on. But the very first military documents in the history of the world, the autobiography of Winnie, is talking about all black people coming together to take military action against these exact same white people, right? That's the autobiography of Winnie. When you go home, you can read it and see exactly what it is. It talks about bringing upper and lower Kemet together, east and west of the Nile, and every kind of Nubian together to take military action against these whites. If you look at the instruction to Mary Carré, that again is talking about the miserable Eurasian, how they're wretched because of the place they're in, short of water and bare of wood, how their behavior is based on that. Now, all of this is just to say, when we think about this, and I was struck by this in the film, that Frantz Fanon is talking about how envious the colonized native is, and how he wants the colonizer's house and to sleep in the bed, hopefully with the wife.
And I think about this in terms of Frantz Fanon himself being married to a white woman, as well as many of the other liberation leaders. Amilcar Cabral, before he got married to who he got married to, he was with a white woman who he ended up leaving. If you look at Kwame Nkrumah, married to an Arab. If you look at Jomo Kenyatta, married to a white woman, just about all of them. And it really just brings the point about, we mentioned violence other than physical violence, like just this level of violence in terms of interpersonal relations and things of that nature. And ultimately, how can someone truly be for Black people when there's a vector of compromise? That vector of compromise meaning that when we're all talking about what to do for Black people, that this person is meanwhile sleeping with the enemy. When we're all talking about, yes, let's do this for Black people, this person has taken money from the enemy or is working for the enemy, that there are all these different levels by which one compromises. So I wanted to, again, bring us back to the documentary and then deal with, you know, that type of issue. If you have someone who is married to a white person, at what point in time do the interests of Black people now transition to, oh, but I have to protect the interests of this white wife, in the case of Frantz Fanon and all of these other, you know, Black leaders? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yes.
So I used to last year do this program called Black Love Matters, and I did it for about a year and a half or so, every Friday on KCBLR radio, which stands for Kansas City Black Liberation Radio in Ghana. And one of the things that we were doing with the non-physical violence part is to relearn how to believe in each other again, and to want each other again, and to want to be with each other again. And that's what the whole impetus and the push was behind that, because that's one of the things that gets lost in the fire. So you look at someone like Cheikh Anta Diop, and he's married to this French woman, and at first you start reading his works and you're like, yeah, and then somehow you see a photograph and you're like, oh, wait, what? You know, because as colonized and dehumanized and enslaved and oppressed and all of the things as we've been, that's one of the things as we begin to decolonize, you want to look for and believe in. You know, you want to be like, yes. You want to, you know, you see Dwayne Wade, and then you're like, yes, okay, look who you married. Okay, yes, woo, okay, good. Because that's all sort of part of that. Because remember, we weren't allowed to do that. This was part of the warfare. You can't be on a plantation loving your woman. No. You can't be on a plantation protecting your woman. You can't be on a plantation protecting your children. Oh, no. That's been farmed out. That's been, you don't even have that basic human decency and right to be able to do that. So now that these shackles are being thrown off, this rush to recoup that which was lost, I saw and resonated with some of that in this film. And I just found myself at times just holding my breath like, please don't let any of these freedom fighters be hugged up on anybody else other than, you know, it's like, oh, okay, good, we got through that scene. Okay, well, okay, we got through that. Because we need to see each other, helping each other out, loving each other. And I love what he said about the IMF, Thomas Sankara said about the IMF. Name a country where they did some good. Name a country where they came in and it's like, yep, see this? Now look how much better they are because of the IMF. You can't do it, he said, right? And so what's he saying? He's talking about us helping us lifting us for us. And that cuts across politics and environment and economy and wartime. It cuts into relationships. We have to be unapologetically Black in our relationships if we're halfway serious about restoring the centuries-old injury that's been done to us.
Well, I mean, I guess not because I'm married to a white person, but I think there's another lesson there. And one lesson was that we ought to be better than those that colonize us. In our response to, or in our bid to decolonize, we ought to do better. And one way of being better is not to also think and treat the other as an enemy. So if you start with the premise that, well, you can be fighting for us and be sleeping with the enemy, then you're thinking like the other person who was thinking of us as the enemy and, you know, raping us or doing bad things to us. But we ought to do better. So loving her, seeing her is not because she's white. It's just because of the love that we have together. So if the African is going to say, well, in terms of decolonization, my relationships, everything ought to be us, then we're missing the point. And I thought the latter part of the movie was calling us to be better, not to ape them. Right. So if they did that, if they treated us in that way, if they saw that we were not humans, it doesn't mean that in our bid to decolonize, we ought to treat them the same way. Right? We ought to have a better attitude towards that. And I think I don't see anything wrong with fighting for or asking or arguing for decolonization and marrying a white person or having relationships with a white person. I don't think that, you know, Africans ought to beg, you know, the IMF. We can be advocating for, you know, what the president has been saying, right? What is it? The aid thing. This slogan, Africa beyond aid, right? So we don't have to run to the IMF, but at the same time, we can also cut ourselves, you know, for the rest of the world and think, well, it is now time for us to develop, time for us to decolonize, so we have nothing to do with the West. Right? Again, we always will have to have some form of negotiation, but we're smarter now, right? We use a better attitude towards them and not also treat them in that way. So
okay, so, do you mind if we go to the back and we come to you?
If I could just touch on this because it's
okay.
directly related to
Okay.
what you said. So oftentimes when we talk about how we don't want to end up acting like the whites, oftentimes we do that when we're speaking the languages of the whites, when we go to the churches of the whites, when we wear the clothes of the whites, when just like white men, we sleep with white women. So apparently it's very selective when we come to the things that we do want to ape and the things that we don't want to ape. So perhaps the one thing that would be appropriate, which would be reciprocity, that's the one thing that we don't want to do. Meanwhile, everything else in every other area of our lives, from the way that we speak, to the way that we dress, to the way that we eat, to the way that we sleep, to everything else is exactly like these exact same white people. So I think that, you know, there's a certain level of ulterior selectivity in when we say that we don't want to become like them. And then I also think about inappropriate behavior. I think about inappropriate behavior, and I think about this in terms of self-defense. So if someone comes into my house, kicks in my door, shoots my children, stabs my wife, and then I say, here, let me give you a hug, that would be seen as criminally insane behavior.
Right.
Now, if they came in my house and I saw them on the way to where my children are, I would not say to myself, oh no, if I use force against you, I'm behaving just like you. I should be better than you, right? Now, this is what gets shoved down our throats as black people when our heroes are decided by people who are not black and who are not interested in the survival of black people. So we are taught to be like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi, right? Those are the ones that white people are telling us are our heroes. Now, if we chose our heroes for ourselves, then we may choose someone like a Malcolm X. That's one who they don't shove down our throats every day. We may choose a hero like an Amilcar Cabral, who many people don't even know that name, but someone who actually fought on the liberation front for black people. We would choose someone like Gangu Baba out of India, who was a freedom fighter in the 1800s, who was, you know, using violence in order to do that. But again, once we understand that the enemies of black people are interested in us taking this position of, you know what, if they kick down my door and wants to exterminate my entire family, let me hug them so that I'm not like them. Again, this is inappropriate behavior, and to me it's criminally insane, especially for someone who is doing every single thing else exactly like white people, except for that one single thing, which would be the appropriate response to what has been brought to us.
I don't know the right way to say this or the right words to say this with, but I feel like if doing better than the enemy doesn't mean being with the enemy. It doesn't mean, I don't know how to say this, but I feel like now more than ever we should go for self. We should be pro-black unapologetically, because from what I watched, I realized nothing has changed. The kind of capitalism that was going on in there, it hasn't changed. If I'm in my opinion, I think the only thing that has changed is they aren't here. They aren't raping us anymore. They aren't beating us anymore. They aren't putting us through all of that physical violence that we saw in the documentary. But I feel everything that went on there is still alive and well. So that being said, I can say the white people aren't doing better. They aren't doing better, so why should I do better? Why should I have to go for them now? Because I've gained independence. Why should I? They aren't doing better. That's all I'm trying. I don't know. But he said, I think he said everything that I wanted to say with the right words. I don't. The fact that we are trying to do better than the enemy doesn't mean we should be with the enemy. Because the enemy is still an enemy. They have enemies.
If someone kills 10 billion of my people in the Congo, I do not call them friends of the Congo.
I think there's some sort of historical context in which we can think of that kind of polarity.
Well, I think you're.
But I think that we've come far in to maybe tone down the rhetoric. So I see this movie to be pertinent to Africans, for us to watch and then know what to do. But I also see it to be pertinent to the European to also watch, to know what happened, right? To know, and most of them are just oblivious as to exactly what colonialism was all about and what their ancestors did. Now, when they watch some of these things, so of course, we don't expect them to watch it and then try to come back and say, well, we are sorry, so we're coming to do some things to repair the relationships or whatever. But it is still good for them to watch. So maybe if we tone down the rhetoric in our bid to take matters into our own hands and lift us up and do things from an African perspective, treating the white person as an enemy and using certain adjectives to describe them, I don't think that's the best way to go. But I mean, it's my opinion.
Well, I think you're right to suggest that we need to look at the word enemy to see how we're using the word enemy. And I think that's probably the only thing that I would agree with you on in that regard. That when we look at the word enemy, it doesn't necessarily mean the one who is directly doing the thing themselves, but it's more holistic a term. It's the ones who benefit from it. It's the ones who are silent about it, who look the other way, who could do something but who aren't doing something, who would do something if it was someone else doing it, but who somehow seem out of ideas and impotent now that it's their people doing it. I've just been doing research over the last few weeks on something that's called the Extinction Protocol. What that means is that the planet is literally on a fast track for extinction. Literally. And it is by and large at the behest of the inventions of white people. We didn't invent napalm. We didn't invent Agent Orange. We didn't invent all of these virulent vaccines that have been weaponized. We didn't invent these religions that neutralize us and incapacitate us from self-advocacy. These are things that are at the, if you listen to what white people are saying about this thing that's been set in motion that we can no longer stop. It is no longer stoppable. We are at a point of no return. This is why there are some people who are using the term enemy in a broader sense. When you consider the fact that there's no way an African with an African company can go into any European, Asian, or Arab country and pollute the airways and waters the way they can, they would be stopped so abruptly and so immediately. This gets at the core of our use of the word enemy and how it may seem to, in all fairness, be like a broad brush. It's just too broad a brush. It's just not fair. And if there are people who want to help, I agree with Tim Wise, who calls himself a European Jew, although there's no such thing as a European Jew, but let's humor him and let him do it, right? Tim Wise and the woman, Jane, what's her name, with the blue-eyed, brown-eyed study, and several other folks, right? I like what they do as white people. What they do is they take the fight to their communities, to themselves. Don't come here. You've done enough harm here. Thank you, but no thank you, right? But they take the battle and they lay the axe at the consciousness and the root of their own trees. And I think that's an effective strategy. But to come here to say we've come to help is to add insult to injury, because it's to say on some level, you still don't know what to do with yourselves. So that we're gonna come here now and be your great white hope. So I think when we're looking at the use of the word enemy and how it's been used in a broad sense, that's what you have to take into consideration that people are experiencing. The Flint, Michigan water poisoning thing, that wasn't done by Africans in African countries and African companies. That's not how that was done. So, and people see this. The Tuskegee studies, that was not initiated by African doctors. That's not how that was done. Medical Apartheid, which is an extremely well-documented book on how the entire American medical system was built on poor whites and then mostly enslaved Africans for medical practices, techniques, all these types of things. This was done by the white establishment. People still remember this, and they're still victims of it. The sterilization, the mass sterilization, Israel sterilizing thousands of Ethiopian women. People remember this. So we're not seeing enemy in a very linear, concrete sense in the way that you may be referring to it. So that's my 2 cents.
So also, and I'm glad that Dr. Carnita spoke, because when we look at this and then we talk about this as something like a historical, like a museum piece, it really speaks to our lack of knowledge of what's going on right now in Eastern Congo. If you look at every single conflict, there are resources behind that conflict, and then the ones who foment those conflicts, there are no bazooka factories in Eastern Congo. There are no machine gun factories in Eastern Congo. How are they getting there? If you look at corporations like Halliburton, right? If you look at Blood Diamonds, you look at the De Beers and the diamond cartels. If you look at southeastern Nigeria over oil, Royal Dutch Shell. If you look at each and every conflict, if you look at the conflicts in the Maghreb, you're looking at France and their nuclear interests right there across the border in Niger. If you look at every single conflict, you can trace, just follow the money trail, and you'll find out who started that conflict and for what purpose. So to say, oh yes, this can remind us of what happened in the past. Right now, over 10 million people, so that was Leopold's time. Right now, there's over 10 million people due to coltan mining. And again, this is at the behest of white interests, right? So that's one, the more that we know, the more that we're able to see that this isn't something in the remote past. This is something that's going on right now, and what white people are unleashing on black people, that's one. The second point is the whole challenge with the Serhanta Job and the Jomo Kenyatta and so forth and so on, is that the role of their white partners is to make this black person now essentially like an attack dog on their behalf. So whereas black people are sitting discussing black issues, now we have someone whose interests are now, how would I say, divided at the very least, or compromised at the very most. So now we're discussing what should we do as black people, what should we do as black people, and everyone here is talking about what we should do as black people, but instead of everyone dealing with this, now we have some people who are interested in how to protect the interests of white people, right? Because they're very close to those exact same white people, to the point that we can even turn a blind eye to what white people are doing right now to black people because we have these close relations. And I think that's really the challenge, and that's really, if we're talking about doing something different, right? We talk about inappropriate behavior. If we're talking about doing something different, there has to be something different where we're not serving the interests as attack dogs because we've been compromised either through personal relationships, we've been compromised through grants and funding, we've been compromised through employment, we've been compromised through religion. We pray to an imaginary whiteboard.
Compromised through seeds.
Compromised through seeds, through food. What Nana Thomas Sankara said, he who feeds you controls you, right? So these are all the vectors that they're always throwing at you to make sure that when we're talking about the interests of black people, your interests are now divided, not focused on black people, but now I have to focus on how to protect this white partner that I have, or white employer that I have, or white savior that I have, or white whatever that I have. I think that those who have not been compromised in that way, it behooves us to not fall into those same traps. Otherwise, we'll get the exact same end results, which haven't served us very well up to this point.
Yeah. I also wanted to add onto the topic of love. When I think of love, I mean, today in the Foundations of African Thought, one profound thing that kept stemming up was Umuntu Ingumuntu Ingabantu, which is like a person is a person because of other person. So we are not here just because of some miracle that happened that, you know, makes us sit in this room, but we are here because of our ancestors, of people who lived before us. And I feel like we owe them a responsibility. Now, if we are going to claim, I feel like love must first stem from self-love. And to love yourself, to see things from an African perspective is also to see yourself as a communal being, as, you know, you're a person because of those who came before you. So if I love myself, I also love those who came before me, and I owe them a responsibility to continue to produce the best of offsprings, you know, I could probably and then essentially have. But all that I'm saying is that if I'm to look in the video and then I see what has been done to my ancestors, and I go back to love the very people who were brutalizing them and continue to brutalize us now, then I'm starting to be like individualistic, you know, it's just all about me. I'm not thinking about, you know, the people who through their efforts and then through their conscious decisions and whatnot, I can now sit in this room and then come again.
He said, or you just don't understand about this.
I don't think that is, I feel like love transcends, you know, the individual, and it goes also towards, you know, the collective, our ancestors, you know,
So
and they loved us so
we
much
can
to
also
have made,
transcend
I feel like they loved us so much to have made conscious decisions, conscious effort to make sure that we sit in this very room and then talk whether or not, you know, this is appropriate or not, you know, but we see that, for me, I cannot be loving the very enemies of, you know, I mean, unless I'm of a certain conscience.
Yeah,
you know.
I like that you say for you.
Yeah, I mean, and for any other African person, you know, I don't think that you can love, you know, your very colonial enemies who brutalize your ancestors and continue to brutalize you today, especially if you understand the concept of self-love, which transcends, you know, generations down, and also to those unborn. But that's what I wanted to chip in. But do we have any more? What I would,
I'd like to say just really quick.
Okay.
That so Dr. Amos Wilson, he deals with power on different levels, right? And he says that power at its lowest level is power as force, And when power is implemented as force, it causes a reaction where you yourself will use force to counter that force. Then he deals with power as coercion. This means I'm not actually using force at this point, but I'm threatening the use of force. You can also get people to behave in that way. Then he also talks about power as influence. This means that through what I'm telling you, I can now get you to do the same thing that I could have used force or coercion to do, but now this one is more subtle and therefore is more effective. Then he deals with power as competent and legitimate authority. This means because I have X degree or because I have X position, I have X title, then listen to me and I can get you to do what I want you to do on that basis. But he says the highest level of these strands of power is what he refers to as manipulation. And with manipulation, what makes it so effective is that you don't know that you're being controlled. So that means that you're not going to fight back against that control. This means that a white person doesn't even have to utter a word, and the black person will say everything to defend their interests to the death, right? This is power as manipulation, and I think this is the ongoing legacy of what was discussed in terms of the documentary, is that we can see, when I say it's not just something in the past, we can see right now, today, this evening, we can see how a white person can be entirely protected by someone who should be fighting for black people, but rather may be short-circuiting the interests of black people in order to protect those white interests.
I think it's better if we don't make it more of a personal attack.
Yeah, I agree. So as I was saying, I think it's very good if we can understand
this
power.
This is just supposed to be an intellectual discussion, right? And as much as we are entitled to our opinions and views, I think it's better if it's not made more of a personal attack. I think it's better if I don't respond to some of the personal attacks, but I'll plead that you don't get to the extent of making it more personalized.
Do you feel attacked about something? Because I don't think anyone mentioned anyone's name. So as I was saying, there's a proverb in Chi, Onyame dansini ya ahonim, that Onyame's witness is self-knowledge. So there's a story, an Anansi story, where all of the animals said, who was going to carry the drum? They said, the animal that's ugly should carry the drum. And the monkey said, I refuse to carry the drum. And then they asked Yabowedin, did we mention your name? So they say that the dog that yelps is the one who got hit by the stone. In Chi they say, Okutia Nimnibra, that innuendo knows its owner. But all of this is to say that I think that it's very
what I just said. I mean, so we all know all of that. So once you start saying all these things, then of course, because I reacted to that, because I have a white wife here. So I mean, I'm just saying that we can engage in these intellectual discussions, and we are entitled to opinions without necessarily making it personal. So
yeah,
if you bring it all the way to what is happening this evening, you know, white person keeping quiet and a black person defending, you know,
it's all
right.
part of it. And I
I guess we can make the point without.
Yeah, but I think that if anybody made it personal, it was you when you introduced yourself as having a white wife, and nobody said it.
Yeah, so actually, I
you
don't
made
know,
it personal, but nobody has.
That's what I said from in one of my comments that I learned a lot from this, but I also think it's equally important that she also gets to know, right? I think we can engage in the discussion without some of them. I mean, of course, we can talk in general terms. We all know not all black people and not all white people were that bad, right? Or so, of course, we all using these general terms, even though we know that you can assume that, you know, Nazi Germany, all Germans were that. I mean, we all know that. So in my mind, I think that it is good for her to learn. I don't know what reaction she would have. I don't know how she's going to respond to that, knowing and seeing what we just seen, right? So that's why I thought that it was quite pertinent, not only that, you know, Africans watch such a movie, but someone like her can also watch such a movie. Of course, it depends on whether you think that it's appropriate for her to watch or not watch. I thought it was quite interesting for her to watch, and then and then see what will be her reaction, what might be her comments, what might be her views about that, and so.
That we were all thinking this until you said it, right?
I'm not assuming that.
Right, I know.
I didn't say
but I'm
that,
just saying to you, we didn't know, and this is a discussion now. And you're assuming. Let me finish because let me finish. Because you're taking. If you're taking something personal, I think it's because you're making it personal. Because if you weren't in the room and we were having this exact conversation, would it be attacking? And we have had this exact conversation. So what makes it attacking when you're here versus when we're having this exact conversation when we're not? Now, on the issue of you're wanting your wife to see this film, no one has yet said, we disagree, she shouldn't be in the room. Yeah, sure. No one has said that. Sure. Whether you bring her here, whether you don't bring her, that's your prerogative. I'm assuming you have a reason for what you're doing. So please, you have to also take some responsibility for how you're feeling and not project it onto the difficulty of the conversation. Because let me guarantee you, if I was sitting here married to an Arab man, if I was sitting here married to an Asian man, if I was sitting here married to a white man, and this discussion came up, I guarantee you I'm gonna be feeling a kind of way. I guarantee you I'm gonna start feeling kind of a little bit turbulent here. Why? Because I'm married to this guy. So I get it, but I'm just saying that I think you're making it personal when it's not really personal.
And we had this discussion when we looked at Commit to You about Cheikh Anta Diop. So when we looked at Commit to You about Cheikh Anta Diop, an illustrious ancestor, it also came up about his white wife, and we mentioned all of the presidents who had white wives, and there wasn't anyone in the room who was married to a white wife. But we had this entire discussion for, the whole second part of the discussion.
Still my brother's book.
Right. I've enjoyed the discussion. I've enjoyed the different opinions and views. Right. And I'm just saying that at some point where it was heading towards was becoming more of a personal attack. That's all. That's I say. I don't feel uncomfortable. I mean, this is not the only forum where we've been where such discussions have taken place, right? But I would prefer the discussions as it started and as it proceeded, without necessarily making it more personalized. Getting to the point of even
without anyone
at this,
taking
even
anything
at this
personally.
evening, where someone once you try, making and then you quote these proverbs, those kind of things.
So
then it becomes more like
if we can have a discussion without anyone taking anything personal, I would also appreciate that.
I'm not
so in the spirit of reciprocity,
that's when you
I'm not saying you. So
let's not try.
Just as we say, if we can have a discussion without anyone making it personal, I would also like to say if we can have a discussion without anyone taking it personal. We're discussing black issues for the interests of black people. Unapologetically, we're here in Africa at the Institute of African Studies in a room filled with African people. Then we should be able to discuss issues pertinent to African people without apology and without us biting our tongue thinking that, maybe someone will take it personally. You understand? So I think that this is a space where we should be able to express our thoughts, our ideas. Again, there's no force, there's no coercion, there's no influence. We're discussing this and we're not being violent.
But I want to say something really quick too. I don't know if anybody in the room was. Okay, sorry. I don't know how many folks were here for that film on the two guys that we spoke to, the two film directors. Mm-hmm. What was that country?
Colombia. For humanity.
Yeah, the place that's just the suburb of Colombia.
Palenque.
Yeah.
Palenque.
Thank you, Palenque. Yeah. Yes. Palenque also came up in my mind during the film. When we're looking at all these things and how folks are trying to kind of get themselves back together again and restabilize themselves, right? I literally thought about that film. I thought about Palenque, and I'm like, that would be a good time to like usher in aggressively that kind of governance, because for 400 years, what did they have? 2 or 3 acts of violence?
Yeah.
In 400 years? Mm-hmm. And not that there's not some issues, because there's a board of elders that they take issues too, right? And they're like, we know where all y'all live, right? We know everybody. We know everybody's name, Why is your child out this late at night? Where's your mom at? We're gonna go talk to her. There was all of this kind of thing. So the part in my mind, and I think the reason why that movie came up was, again, this thing of, okay, after we watch these films, a little bit about what you're saying too, sis. After we watch these films, what are we gonna do about it? What's our next step? What's any updates from this film or the previous film that we have to inform us going forward, so that we can unapologetically get back to that's happening. And I also want to applaud you, and I want to applaud you, and I want to applaud you for saying the things that you said this evening, because look at what happened. As we're trying to talk about what's important to us, look at how it got derailed, right? And so we got to stay on that. So we got to go back to that Polanyi model,
Sure.
and how they governed themselves, and how the elders were at the core of this community, right? Keeping things for over, I mean, this blows my mind. 400 years, 3 acts of violence, no divorces. And it was just astonishing. So I superimpose in some way that movie
Sure.
onto this movie
Yeah.
to say, okay, so now, you know, to say, okay, now what do we do about it? Now, how do we make sense out of this? Now, how do we come out of this room and not just say, wow, wasn't that a powerful movie, and then that's that, right? What impact is it going to have on
Yeah.
us?
I think people should come to capoeira class to learn how to defend themselves.
Right.
That is a tangible end result, where we come to a place where if someone wants to attack us, we know how to attack us, we know how to attack them. And what I find is that on an individual level, once you start to understand the principles of capoeira, it helps when you introduce weapons, when you introduce higher levels of weapons, because the same strategies, the same principles apply to empty hand, apply to knife, apply to sword, apply to stick, that if you can think about these things correctly, then no matter what the weapon is, advanced technology, that this now can translate. But if you've never thought about it on any level, if you never thought about it on any level, then this becomes the first time I'm thinking. And I'm thinking about this in the context of a documentary I looked at where the US Vietnam fighter pilots were talking about the 1 or 2 victories that they had. And as they were discussing the strategies, the same strategies of showing you up when I'm really trying to go down is the exact same thing that I would do in capoeira. Now, if you don't understand those principles, I can put you in a multi-million-dollar fighter jet, and that's just going to be trash crashed, you know, at the bottom of the forest, because you don't understand those core principles that can be now transcended. So yeah, I think that is along the lines of what you mentioned. I hope everyone comes on Saturday. To the sports director, I hope that guy especially comes on Saturday to the sports director, and you know, stays for the class, and then the sparring session afterwards. He would really love that sparring session. That's what I think he would really get the most out of.
I don't want to cut us, but I just want to say in the interest of time, so we can, you know, be wrapping up.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, too, I just want us to collectively, you know, decide a film for next week. So 2 I have in mind, one from your class today, Moody, because also it shows like what we can be doing for ourselves. And then the second also, Thomas Sankara, Upright Man, you know, which also shows like, I mean, a complement to the violence, or a complement to the resistance movement, you know, whereby we are going about planting trees, doing all of these like social projects, and he also talks about the IMF, and then, you know, also, you know, trying to get us to just derail from all of these like aid agencies, and then, you know, focus more on the self. So these are 2. Muli is a Kenyan man who takes in all of these street kids, and then eventually they find themselves on a huge like barren land, and then they grow and plant trees, and within 5 years the river is flowing again, the whole vegetation is green and whatnot. And then Sankara too details the life of Sankara, but also his philosophies and his thoughts. So these are 2 that I would love for us to like, you know, decide as a group, you know, what we want to see.
Has anybody seen Mali?
We showed it at the film festival.
Oh, well then maybe we should show Mali.
Has anyone ever seen The Upright Man?
No problem, Mr. Thomas.
I think we should watch Sankara films.
Yeah, me too.
You want more revolutionary stuff?
So let's see how we can change the status quo by looking at Sankara. To me, he's the best president of any of the African countries.
Okay. Thank you.
Really? I like him promo, but Sankara is the best. Yeah. So
Even more than Amilcar.
Oh, you mean
Yeah.
Amilcar wasn't
because-
president. He was assassinated.
No, I'm talking about in terms of the impact on the people.
well, not in terms of impact, but in terms of philosophies and then
Okay.
practice, what they did.
Nice.
To me, Sankara speaks more to me than yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know about the rest.
Some
of
kind
us.
all in favor of Sankara.
Either way, it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation either way. I'm for
Yeah,
either
so
one.
let's say for next week we'll watch like Thomas Sankara, then
Then the
the
following week,
we'll
Molly.
watch Molly. Okay.
Yeah.
But then we can now use what you asked to close out to, as to like what we can do and what not.
Yeah, so I think I've been thinking about this ever since I made that suggestion, Doc, and that is maybe what can happen is when the email announcement is sent out, there could be some type of, I don't know, action sheet, if you will, or action outline that sort of gets our minds thinking a little bit so that when we watch the film, we I don't want to say talking points, maybe like mobilizing strategies might be a better term. So that when we get through watching a movie and then we're kind of processing and discussing, then we can kind of come back and look at the mobilizing strategies, because we have to, we can't leave what you're saying just there, like, oh, and then that's it. We owe you a responsibility to do something about that. And same way with what you're saying, you know, if it's like, okay, well, let's look at strategies and answers, we can't like just be silent on that. You know, we owe it to you to do something. So that would be my thinking, that as that email is sent out, then these mobilizing strategies are also there. And then I don't know what's going on. They're pronouncing it Muli. I always said Mully, but I don't know what's going on with him these days. So so maybe after that film we can get an update, but also with the Thomas Sankara that we'll see next week, maybe we can get an update on the movement and the impact that he left and where is that momentum now, and that could be helpful.
There's another documentary that we showed, I think it was last year, Burkinabe Rising, and it was on the grassroots movement that led to Blaise Compaoré being ousted, you know, through plays that people did on the streets, through protests and people started doing, that ended up just spiraling out of, you know, that smaller space into a place where Blaise Compaoré had to get out of there, and then ultimately, so, you know, in terms of that, and then like 2 weeks ago, they unveiled a statue of Thomas Sankara, so all of these things that were being suppressed about Thomas Sankara's life, and the people who were part of that revolution that ousted Blaise Compaoré, they said that they're carrying on the spirit of Thomas Sankara. So that's also another documentary, if we're looking at that type of update, type of format of what's going on right now.
Okay.
So let's see, Thomas Sankara.
Sure, why not?
And come with your birds.
Made
Made from batik.
With bullets on the strap.
Yeah.
with commission pieces. So yeah, I would love to say like thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your presence. And as we all know, next week is going to be Thomas Sankara, an upright man. So let's do well to like spread the information. You know, I'm taking your emails too, so we'll be sending you the posters and event details so that you can also share it with your friends and then people you may know, people who may be interested. But once again, this is happening like every Thursday from 5 to 9. So yeah, please do join us for the films.
And one more thing. Sometimes we tell our friends and then they just don't want to show up. But one thing I would tell everyone here, especially the students, is this. when you have discussions with your friends and issues about African liberation comes up, don't let them silence you. Let them reason with you. If you can't get them to come here, you can get them to reason. So try as much as possible. Like you said, don't be apologetic. Do not do that. Don't allow them see that you are weak. And then with time, I feel you can, if you're not able to bring them here, you would still impact them somehow. So yes, strong.
Black power.
And last but not least, I just want to make, so the part I was talking about
You're saying we should
self-love.
close and you're still talking.
Self-love, I was talking to my kids, so you know, you all better know. Okay, thank you so much.